Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to this next session of the Londoniyyah series. In the previous session we discussed takfir, which is excommunication. Today we're going to be talking about Tabdee, which is not exactly excommunication, but it's deeming someone as somewhat of a heretic, or if you like, someone who's a deviant, someone who doesn't conform to the orthodox understanding, but would otherwise conform to a heterodox understanding of the religion, being a deviant thereby. So, Abdurrahman, you can read, inshallah, the poem, and then we'll come back and discuss.
فصل الرد على التبديعيين. أما الذي بدع مثل النووي والعسقلاني فذلك الغوي فمن لنا بمثلهم أئمة قد نشروا الهدى وكل حكمة.
Naam. So we're going to be speaking about, inshallah, first of all, what the word bid'ah means. So the word bid'ah means something which is, in the terminological sense, added to the religion of Islam, something al-muhdath fi din, something which is new to the religion of Islam. And a very famous hadith to this effect is the hadith narrated by Aisha radiallahu anha. من أحدث في أمرنا هذا ما ليس منه فهو رد. Whoever adds to this religion of ours that which is not part of it, then it is rejected. Why is this the case? Because the religion of Islam is complete. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran in chapter 5 verse 3, اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا. Today I have completed your religion and I have اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم and perfected my favor upon you and chosen Islam as the religion for you. And so therefore, if something is complete and perfect, why does it require addition? This is a question that really needs asking. But it gets murky, and the question of what bid'ah is and what exactly the scholars have said about it is not exactly an area of consensus. And so today, inshallah, we're going to start with how the scholars differed, actually. The scholars of Islam, how they differed in understanding this concept of bid'ah. Some of them adopting a broader view, and others adopting a stricter and narrower view. And the reason why either of those groups of scholars adopted either of those views. Now, in the khutbah that or the Friday sermons, you are likely to have heard in the beginning of that sermon, كل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. That everything which is newly invented in the religion is a bid'ah, is an innovation. And every innovation is something which is a misguidance. And every misguidance is in the hellfire. But how this has been understood by scholars has been different. So there are two groups of scholars, broadly speaking. Some of which who had reserved a very kind of, as we've said, all-encompassing and generalizing understanding of this particular hadith, and others who didn't. So for example, Ash-Shawkani, who relatively, actually, he's classical, but he's 300 years ago, so in the 1700s or so. He says, كل بدعة ضلالة includes every single, وكل محدثة بدعة, anything which is newly invented in the religion, is in fact, this is what's included here. Whereas other scholars, potentially like a Nawawi, quite frankly, would say, no, this is not saying all types of things, it's saying all types of things. Because when the word kull is used, sometimes it can mean every single thing, and it could sometimes mean all types of things. And Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam, who I think, and I've put some extracts of some of the things that he said here, which we can read together in a second. But the argument that he's making is that in fact, it's not when the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man ahdatha fi amrina hada," and I know we said the same thing here. Whoever introduces something into our affair, ma laysa minhu, which is not originally part of it, فهو رد, then it's rejected. Meaning, if it is outside of the scope of religion or religious discourse, then it's rejected. But if it has an asl min usul al-din, Or if it's something which, if you introduce something which is within the confines of religion, then it's acceptable. This is how they understood it. So let me just put this again. There are two groups of scholars. When the hadith of Aisha comes ahead, and the hadith is saying, "Man ahdatha fi amrina hadha," whoever introduces something which is not part of our religion, then it's rejected. One group of scholars that says anything that the Prophet ﷺ or that the Sahaba didn't do is rejected. Another group of scholars say, actually it's not anything that the Prophet ﷺ or the Sahaba didn't do. It's anything which doesn't have an asl. It doesn't have a foundation. It doesn't have a category or a genus which it can be subcompartmentalized under. That is what would be rejected. And you'll find that because of this, some people actually make taqsimat or classification of bid'ah into different categories. So, An-Nawawi is one of those individuals who quite clearly divided bid'ah into different types. And he says, and he divides it into different types. You know, you have the wajib bid'ah, the one which is mandub, and the one which is makruh, and you probably heard of this term bid'ah hasana, which is the good bid'ah. I say, well, how can you have something which is a bid'ah hasana? We'll come and explain what they mean by this. But let's read exactly what Al-Izz ibn Abd Salam states, because he was one of the, I would say, one of the scholarly kind of proponents of the broader view. He says, and he's another person who's divided the bid'ah into different types. He says, وَهِيَ مُنْقَسِمَةٌ إِلَى وَاجِبَةٌ وَمُحَرَّمَةٌ وَمَنْدُوبَةٌ مَكْرُوهَةٌ وَمُبَاحَةٌ. So bid'ah is divided into the following taqsimat. Wajib, which is obligatory. Muharram, which is haram. Manduba, which is allowable in certain contexts, or manduba, which is mustahab, basically, right? Something which is mandub means mustahab, which means sunnah, or in the sense that you will be rewarded if you do it, and you will not be sinning if you don't do it. Okay, this is what mandub means. Or makruha, or the opposite. So you'll be rewarded if you leave it, but you will not be sinful if you don't do it. Or mubaha, which means you won't be sinful, or it's like halal, right? مباح means halal. والطريق في ذلك أن تعرض البدع على قواعد الشريعة فإن دخلت في قواعد الإيجاب فهي واجبة. So if it goes under, or if it's classified under one of those things which are seen as positive, then he says in this case it's wajibah. Or sorry, if it's seen as, if it goes underneath something which is obligatory, then it becomes obligatory like it. That's what he's saying. So if ما لا يتم الواجب إلا به فهو واجب. This is the usuli principle. Whatever the wajib is not completed with it, without it, then it's wajib as well. For example, I need to go to Hajj. It's wajib to go to Hajj. The transportation for me to get to Hajj would also be wajib. So he's saying something like this, right? كالاشتغال بعلم النحو, and he's giving examples here, like for example learning grammar وتدوين أصول الفقه, and writing down أصول الفقه, which wasn't written down at the time of the Prophet or the Sahaba, but Shafi'i, he's the first person to write the Risala, which is the first kind of book of أصول الفقه, the principles of legislation. He's saying these are all wajib, because without it we would not be able to understand the religion of Islam. ما لا يتم الواجب إلا به فهو واجب. Wherever the wajib is not completed without it, then it's wajib as well. So he's saying that for us to understand the religion of Islam, so we need to understand the grammar of the Arabic language. So it's become obligatory now for some people to come out and to carve out a system of understanding the Arabic language through grammatical schemes. And so this is an example, he's saying, Al-Izz ibn Abd Salam, of a bid'ah which is wajibah, in fact. It's wajibah. It's actually an obligatory type of bid'ah. But this is a contentious notion that you can have a wajib bid'ah, as we're going to come and see the stricter view. But I'm telling you what the broader view of bid'ah in the ummah, with scholars like Al-Izz ibn Abd Salam, have said. because we need to know what all the scholars have said to understand. Maybe you take the stricter view, that's fine. You take the broader view, that's fine, no problem. But you have to know what the other people are saying and why they are saying what they are saying. So this is what they say. أو في قواعد التحريم. But he says that there are some things actually which are haram, like the madhab of the Qadariyya and the Murji'ah, which we talked about last lesson. This is a kind of bid'ah which is in the usul of the religion of Islam, which is a false type of bid'ah. So he says this is the type of tahrim, muharram one. So he gives other kinds of bid'ah. So he says, there's the kind of good type of bid'ah, and they use what Umar ibn Khattab said about Taraweeh as an example of that, because Taraweeh done by Umar ibn Khattab after the time of the Prophet was not something that was necessarily done in that format at the time of the Prophet. So this is how they understand bid'ah hasana. This is how they understand it. Now, to summarize the position of this broader view of bid'ah, you can say the following thing. The first thing is you've got three pieces of evidence that they use for this idea that it's not just a matter of whatever the Prophet and the Sahaba didn't do in the time that is seen as an innovative and haram. They have three types of evidence. The first thing, as we've mentioned already, the hadith of Jabir ibn Abdullah, كل بدعة ضلالة كل ضلالة في النار. They say about that, it's not talking about all the bid'ahs, it's talking about all types of bid'ah. Like تدمر كل شيء بإذن ربها. You know, in the Quran, sometimes the word kul cannot mean all, but it means all types of thing. Like in Surah Al-Ahqaf. So this is the first thing. The hadith of Aisha, which is من أحدث في أمرنا هذا ما ليس منه فهو رد. They say, so it says من أمرنا هذا يعني مفهوم المخالفة, or the understanding or the inferred understanding of the opposite, is that if it's not from the amr, which is the religious matter, which means it doesn't have usul in the religion of Islam, then it's rejected. But if it does have usul, then it's not rejected. This is how they understand it. And interestingly, a third hadith that they use is the hadith, once again, of Jabir ibn Abdullah, من سن في الإسلام سنة حسنة. Whoever starts a sunnah hasana in Islam, they say, how could it be that you start a sunnah hasana in Islam if it's not already pre-established? This is what they say. They say this would indicate that there is a requirement because if everything was sunnah sayyi'ah, which is a bad sunnah, everything was a bid'ah that you would start that was not being done before, that would indicate what? That would indicate that nothing can be done outside of the categories that are mentioned by the Quran Sunnah very explicitly. But what he's trying to say here, or what these types of scholars are saying, once again, the main thesis is that so long as it يندرج تحت أصل من أصول الدين, is subcompartmentalized under one of the main categories of the religion, then it's acceptable. This is what they say, okay? Because this will be unintelligible, they would argue, and this can be argued against, of course, as we'll see. But it will be unintelligible if there's something called a sunnah hasana, or sunnah hasana, for everything that would be new to be bid'ah. How can you start a sunnah hasana? How does that work, you see? So this is the position of the first camp. Now Dhahabi, he states the following. He says, وثبت بالإجماع استحباب يسمى بدعة كالتراويح وذكروا حديث من سن سنة حسنة لكنهم لا يكادوا يضبطوا الفرق بين البدعة الحسنة والبدعة السيئة فهذا يستحسن ما يذمه الآخر. So basically what Al-Dhahabi is standing in the middle of these two kind of approaches to bid'ah. He's saying this is one group of scholars that have this broader view of bid'ah, and this is their evidences. They use this evidence, man sanna sunnatan hasana, and the other group of scholars, they don't agree with this. Yeah. The second camp is the stricter view of bid'ah. And Ash-Shawkani is, we've mentioned him already, but it's not just Ash-Shawkani. I mean, this goes back. You could argue that Ibn Taymiyyah had this view. You could very much argue that. You can argue that many of the Hanabila of the Mutawassitun had this view. You can even argue that Ahmad ibn Hanbal himself had that view. You can make those arguments, and or you can make arguments against. I mean, I'm not saying that this is the only argument you can make, but certainly this is the Salafi position of today. The position that anything that the Prophet ﷺ himself didn't do, or that the Sahaba didn't do, or that the Salaf didn't do, is something which is rejected. This is the standard Salafi position. What we've described before that is not the Salafi position, is something which is usually connected to the Shafi'is and Ash'aris of today. And obviously in terms of implementation or classification, although these are the definitions of bid'ah that they have, both of which have some remnants in the tradition, what they will consider as bid'ah may be different from scholar to scholar, people to or school to school, or whatever it may be. But let's see what Shawkani says. So Shawkani says, من أحدث في أمرنا هذا ما ليس منه فهو رد وهذا الحديث من قواعد الدين لأنه يندرج تحته من الأحكام ما لا يأتي عليه الحصر. So basically he's saying that this is talking about everything. Whatever the Prophet ﷺ did not do, and whatever the Sahaba did not do, especially, we're talking about worship, right? We're not talking about mu'amalat, eating this or doing that. We're talking about worship, the religion of Islam. He would say anything that is introduced is rejected. That is the zahir of the hadith. That is the prima facie understanding of the hadith, and therefore this is what we understand from it. And these are the two views. So I want you to speak with the person next to you for the next 5 minutes, and someone summarize for me before we continue what the stricter view is, what the broader view is, okay, and which of those maybe you prefer, what you are more convinced with, what you're persuaded with, what are the strengths or weaknesses of both of those views, and then we can continue into the next part of the session. Alright, so guys, let's do some summaries. Can someone, based on what we've spoken about, first summarize what the stricter view is and what the broader view is? And then we can maybe look at some limitations, let's not call them limitations. Let's say arguments for and against either view that either the proponents of that view or the opposite view would have. So let's start with definitions of bid'ah and the evidences that are used by both, so we can understand the arguments. Who wants to start us up? Maybe with the stricter view. Who wants to start us with what is the stricter view? What does it say? How does it understand the hadith of كل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة كل ضلالة في النار? How do we understand that?
That everything that you introduce into في أمرنا in our religion, like in a worship kind of sense, is a bid'ah.
Okay, and who holds this view?
Well, as of today, like the Salafi movement.
Right, yeah, Salafi movement, but who in the past scholars?
Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn al-Qayyim, Shawkani as well.
Yeah, okay. This view could also be argued to be the view of Imam Ahmad himself. Could be argued, and his atba' and his followers, his direct followers. And so, okay. And what is the strongest argument with this in terms of that is what bid'ah is?
Is it from Aisha?
Yeah.
Where she said that anything, she mentioned that any innovation in the religion is not.
Yeah, so this hadith is narrated by Aisha, but it's the Prophet speaking.
Sure.
Yeah, so he's saying anything, so exactly this, they would say, he said, Man ahdatha fi amrina hadha. Whoever introduces anything in our amr, in our affair, ma laysa minhu fahuwa rad. Whatever is not in it, it will be rejected. So he says this is very cutthroat and clear, they say, on this matter. And it doesn't even require elaboration, you see. What about the broader view of bid'ah? What are the evidences well, first of all, what is the broader view?
the broader view is that it's not all kind of bid'ah. It's not all innovation. Rather, it's all types of innovation, and the ones which can be accepted are those which have an usul, a principle in the religion.
Yeah, so
or
exactly.
foundation.
So they say that, it's not all types, it's all types, all kinds of bid'ah. And they say that you have some things that will have asl min usul in the religion of Islam. If it's يندرج تحت أصل من الأصول, if it's subcompartmentalized or subcategorized under one of the major usul of the religion, like for example dhikr, so you can do whatever dhikr you like or whatever it is, then it's not bid'ah in that sense. They'll say you're open to do whatever dhikr you like, for instance. And what do they do with bid'ah in terms of classification? How is it classified for those individuals? And give me the names of scholars who classified it thusly.
So Izz ibn Abd Salam.
Mm.
I think he categorized into five categories
Okay. Which are basically the 5 categories of what?
of bid'ah.
No, yeah, the same 5 categories of Sharia.
Yeah.
So it's a bid'ah is like, wajib and makruh and haram and mustahab and so on. Just like the Sharia these are the 5 categories of ahkam, of ruling.
So the 5 ahkam, he just applied it to bid'ah.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So apart from Izz ibn Abd Salam, who also supported this view,
Nawawi,
and Nawawi supported this view,
Ibn Hajar.
and Ibn Hajar. Even though, some would say no, Nawawi didn't believe that, Ibn Hajar didn't believe that. But the truth is, it's clear cut in the shuruhat. Like, you don't have to go far, you just have to go and see what they actually say. And you'd have to do some hermeneutical acrobatics in order to try and get them to say something completely different from what they've said. So it's, I think, fair enough to say that Nawawi and Ibn Hajar took the broader view. Yeah, Izz ibn Abd Salam in particular, he's the one you could say that he started up the taqsimat, this idea of classifications of bid'ah and these kinds of types. Okay, and what are the evidences for the broader view? How do they explain the hadiths which are, at least in the understanding of Shawkani and Ibn Taymiyyah and others, cutthroat, كل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار من أحدث في أمرنا هذا ما ليس منه فهو رد. How would those particular hadiths be understood and explained by those proponents of the broader view of bid'ah?
So when it comes to the hadith of Aisha, they say that because Aisha mentioned fi amrina, in this affair of us.
Bear in mind that this Aisha was the narrator, yeah?
Yeah.
So it's the Prophet speaking.
Yeah. Afwan. So the Prophet ﷺ, when he mentioned this, they interpret it as saying that anything which doesn't have a foundation in the religion, right, is rejected. Not necessarily anything which is new to the religion.
Why? Why did they say that?
Because
The hadith of Umar. I don't know.
yeah.
Use that.
Not just yet. We're still on the Aisha.
Hadith.
Yeah. When they say fi amrina hadha,
Yeah.
she says, or they say, mafhum mukhalafa, if it's not from amrina, if it's not from our affair, then, and it is from our affair, then it's a bid'ah. But if it's not from our affair,
Yeah.
which means it's not from the religion, it's outside the category, the acceptable categories.
Yeah. Okay.
You see the point?
Yeah.
All right. And what about kullu muhdathatin bid'ah? How do they understand that when they say kullu, all types, or do they say how do they understand that?
When they say when kullu is used here, it doesn't necessarily refer to all. Yeah, and it just refers to all types. All,
Brilliant.
Yeah,
And
everything
so
that's intended.
the other hadith they use, what's the third hadith that they use, which is to justify the broader view from the Prophet? You can look at the slides if you like. Yeah, okay, you wanna say that? Whoever said it.
I don't know the whole hadith of Baha, but it's the hadith about that. Whoever, I don't know how to translate sunnah, but because there's even how you translate is a bit difficult. But like some people translate it as whoever introduces like a good practice in
Sunnatan hasana.
Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah, so what do you think they will say about that hadith? Why is that an evidence for the broader view of bid'ah?
Because there's evidence that you can introduce things into the religion, but that is praiseworthy to do so in some
Yeah,
instances.
introduce some things in the religion, which they would say what kinds of things, just to be clear. Going back to the other things that we just said, things which have a what in the religion? An asl in the religion, right? Okay, so which means when they say man sanna sunnatan hasana, whoever introduces something, a sunnah which is hasan, the mafhum mukhalafa is that you're not doing tasneen, or you're not bringing something in which is sunnah sayyi'ah, a sunnah which is bad, an evil sunnah. So if there's a sunnah hasana, they say there must be an evil sunnah, and bringing a good, the hasana one, means that you're not bringing the evil one. By the way, quite frankly, this idea of mafhum mukhalafa is mukhtalafun fi. Like, the Hanafi jurists, they accept it in the usul al-fiqh of, the Hanafis and so on. But it's not always, and I can give you examples, but I don't want to disrupt this discussion. Mafhum mukhalafa is not always logically acceptable. Like, if you say something is good, it doesn't mean that the opposite is possible. That's not always the case. I can give you many examples in the Quran of that. So these arguments are limited for the broader view. Even if one says, man sanna sunnatan hasana, whoever starts a good sunnah, that would indicate that so long as they're not starting a negative sunnah, then that's permissible and acceptable. It's not an undercutter by any means, because they have to attach a mafhum mukhalafa aspect of the argument, which means mafhum mukhalafa means an argument for the contrary, in order to make this argument, which is, it's not always justifiable. It doesn't mean if you're going to put something good, you're doing so in opposition to something bad. And obviously, someone from the stricter view can come back and say, what? With this, so how is it conceivable that someone can put in a sunnah which is hasana and not do something completely new in terms of worship? Give me an example of that.
Bilal used to pray 2 rak'at after making wudu, which is, there's nothing like, it's technically he's doing something that for himself, he had something new that he's doing.
I think the people from the broader view will probably use that for their. That's more for the broader view guys. They'll say, look at that. That's something which is, he's doing something of his own volition, which is not something necessarily spoken of the Prophet. But what I'm asking is something from this hadith. How would someone from the stricter view respond to that claim that if it's sunnah hasana, it's not sunnah sayyi'ah, therefore it's acceptable?
I think they would say, because the phrasing is sunnah hasana, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it shows that it's something which was the practice of the Prophet ﷺ, or his approval. So it's not. So it's like trying to equate the sunnah hasana with a bid'ah hasana. It's not necessarily the same thing. So they would say that when it says whoever starts a sunnah hasana, it's referring to something which has been revived in the religion.
That's something they could say.
Yeah.
But something much simpler than that, say this is lughatan la istalahan. This is talking about the language. Whoever starts something good, because the word sunnah, don't forget, it does mean the path, the way.
Yeah, true.
Whoever starts something good, then that's good. And whoever starts something bad, for example, backbiting, or لا خير في كثير من نجواهم إلا من أمر بصدقة أو معروف أو إصلاح بين الناس. So they will say, so for example, if someone starts backbiting or doing this, then that's a sunnah sayyi'ah, because you're starting the sunnah of the disbelievers, of this, of that. And this is what they would potentially say. So it's not an undercut by any means. And you can see why there is a difference of opinion here. You can see, there are scholars from both sides, both of which are accomplished and credentialed and big scholars that the Ummah has accepted. But both of them have their views. And quite frankly, both of them have a right to their views. But which of those, my question is to you, do you sympathize more with? and why? And this might be a little bit revealing, you know. Maybe there'll be some class fighting. I don't know who's there.
The hardliners.
The hardliners, yeah.
Yeah, because it leaves no room for error. It leaves no room for doubt. You're not playing around with religion. Just, you know, no matter what. This is my personal opinion anyway. Just if something's perfect, something's pure, and there's agreement on it, there's no need to make any innovations. No need to make anything else, and just go with the top scholars. And so why risk something that's most delicate? You know, if you make some decision, you're in danger of falling into something like shirk, or so just keep it simple.
So this is exactly what a lot of the Salaf would say, the predecessors, exactly the attitude they had, the sentiment they had, certainly seemingly the attitude and sentiment of Imam Ahmad himself, you know. What if something is so clear and so pure and so perfect? Why do you need to play around with it? It's there, it's in its purity and it's in its sacredness. If there's even a chance that those other scholars could be right, let's just pretend that there isn't, that they're both acceptable opinions, but if there's a chance, then you could be effectively falling into bid'ah, which the Prophet ﷺ warned against. So why not take the ihtiyat position or the safety position, which is a very fair and popular thing to say, especially nowadays in dawah circles. What else? Who else wants to voice their opinion on this matter?
Yeah, I would also go with the safer and the stricter position, just because I think it is a lot more, pure, clear cut, and also I think in reality, especially today when we do see like things which the stricter position would consider bid'ah, like I think when we look at the examples on their own, without looking at the theory, without looking at just all of the different theories, looking at the examples, I think we can clearly see, which position makes a stronger argument. So I guess, for example, like maybe in the Mawlid, right? Yeah. Like I would say that the strict position, they would say the Mawlid is obviously a bid'ah, and then the other position would say that it's not. And I think in the case of the strict position, I would say that I would agree with them, based on the fact that at the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the companions and the Salaf, like there was nothing that stopped them from practicing Mawlid, even though they had every ability to do so and every opportunity to do so. So the fact that the border position takes that, allows it, I find that strange. So that's why I think the strict position just makes a lot more sense in reality when you apply it.
Right, and if it starts off with the birthday of the Prophet Muhammad, then maybe someone will come and they make the birthday of Jesus. Maybe we can celebrate Christmas now, and then one for each of the prophets, and then we have a celebration every day of the year, maybe, and then because it can become, not practical. It can become chaotic, and each, and then as a result of it, then you have a question of maslaha and mafsada now, of harms and benefits and so on. These people are celebrating this birthday on this time, and these people are celebrating this birthday on that time, and then the Muslims will disunite. So if we continue adding things like this, layers of new celebrations and new worships and then this is something which could cause more division for the ummah, right? So this is another way of looking at. Any other points that someone wants to make before we move on to the hot topic of Tabdee, as Carlos mentions, cancel culture. This is cancel culture 2.0, right? Because last week we were talking about takfir, which is the hard line stuff. There's the raw, the real stuff. But the ones who do Tabdee are a little bit more moderate, maybe if the wording is correct here. Before we move on to that, anyone want to say anything else, or forever? Yeah.
I was just thinking about the ayah, when it talks about those people that brought in monasticism, that they did so, and they
وَرَهْبَانِيَّةً ابْتَدَعُوهَا. Yeah.
مَا كَتَبْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ إِلَّا ابْتِغَاءَ رِضْوَانِ اللَّهِ.
Yeah,
They did so desiring the pleasure of Allah. Obviously, recently I've been engaging with a lot of people that have do these things, introduce practices, celebrating the birthday of this saint and the death of this saint, the Mawlid, all that kind of stuff. And their intention when they're doing it is that, we're doing something good to get closer to Allah and all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
But like, so are these people, you know what I'm saying? They introduced these kind of things, and it wasn't legislated for them, but they did so anyways because they wanted to get closer to Allah. And so if you kind of just think about it, like, if it's something that the Prophet ﷺ actually did, and then you do what he did, then you're doing something which is like, for sure that it's a sunnah, and you also get the ajr of doing something the Prophet ﷺ did. So if you're just thinking about it from the perspective of trying to maximize your good deeds, you might as well just do that which the Prophet ﷺ did, rather than, like inventing new stuff and just saying it's part of the religion.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the view that the hardliners or the stricter ones would take, and say this is absolutely, what's the point of going and doing all these other things in these parties and celebrations now, when everything is there for you, And the ayah doesn't condemn those who, done this kind of bid'ah, but it doesn't praise them either, which makes our job a little bit harder, trying to decipher things. But I guess what one can say is, at least with understanding the kinds of evidences both scholars are using, there should be a level of tolerance that we have to employ. Like, we understand where you're coming from, We don't agree with your position, but we understand where you're coming from. We know what evidences you use, and so on. But now, on that spirit of speaking about tolerance, we talk about tabdee', which is labeling someone as an innovator. And scholars have spoken about what kind of things or what kinds of people would be exempted from this label of innovator. Now, with tabdee', just like many other things in the religion of Islam, you have shurut and you have mawani'. You have shurut is a condition. Conditions, shurut are conditions. And mawani' are preventers. And conditions are things which, if they are not there, then the hukm is not there. ما يلزم من عدمه العدم وما لا يلزم من وجوده الوجود. If what necessitates from its non-existence the non-existence of the thing in question, and what necessitates from its non-existence the non-existence of the thing. Whereas the mana is the opposite of a shart in many ways. The preventer is, if it's there, if the mana is there, the preventer is there, then the thing in question cannot be there. ما يلزم من وجوده العدم. What necessitates from its existence the non-existence of the thing. So let me give you an example. What are some of the, I guess this is an easy question in many ways, but what are the conditions of prayer? Give me a condition of prayer.
The time.
Okay, so dukhul waqt, or the time coming. Yeah, so you have to pray on time in order for the prayer to be acceptable. What is one of the conditions of wudu? Actually, there's only one condition there. I'm not sure, which is the niyyah, right? It's the intention. So, if you don't have the intention to do ablution, it's not ablution, you're just washing yourself. Likewise, if you don't have ghusl or wudu or istiqbal al-qibla or dukhul waqt, all of that stuff, you can't pray. These are shurut of the prayer. Give me an example of a mana of prayer, preventer of prayer.
If you're in the state of junub.
Yeah, say again?
If you're in the state of junub.
Yeah, so if you're janib, or if you are ritually uncleansed, like you've had intercourse or something, yeah, or you have ejaculated some other way. What is another thing that women have every month? Menstruation. So this is, some scholars would say it's not actually a preventer, by the way, I was looking at, but most scholars would say this is a mana' min mawani' as-salah. This is a preventer. So just like prayer, okay, in order for prayer to be acceptable, you need shurut and mawani'. You need conditions to be met, and you need. By the way, what are one of the conditions of prayer? to be acceptable is Islam. You have to be a Muslim. Okay, yes, and same thing with Hajj. And if you're not a Muslim, your prayer is unacceptable. Except for what? Except for dua. Because when the Quran says, فَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ. He doesn't say أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الْمُسْلِمِ إِذَا دَعَانِ. So if his dua is different, and the hadith states, even if somebody's non-Muslim, but he's oppressed, these are exceptions. But actual ritual prayer, 5 times, you have to be a Muslim for it to be acceptable. So in Islam, you always find these 2 things: shurut, which are conditions, and mawana, which are preventers. Something which if you don't do, the thing can't be there. And something that if it's there, then it prevents you from doing the thing. Likewise, you can say Tabdee has shurut and mawana. Tabdee, the issue of somebody calling someone an innovator, deviant. Well, first of all, we have to define bid'ah. We have to know what bid'ah they've fallen into. And then we have to assess whether this person, if everything has all the shurut, intafat al-shurut, استوفيت الشروط وانتفت الموانع. That all of the conditions have been met, استوفيت الشروط وانتفت الموانع, and all the mawana, all the preventers have been alleviated. So there are no preventers and all the conditions are there. Same thing, by the way, with takfir. All the conditions have to be met for takfir, and all the preventers have to be left for takfir, for excommunication. So if someone is in a coma and says, "Oh, I'm a Christian," no, this person's مرفوع القلم. رفع القلم عن ثلاث. The hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says the pen has been lifted on 3 people. النائم حتى يستيقظ, the one who's sleeping until they wake up. والصبي حتى يحلم, and the one who's prepubescent until he becomes pubescent. والمجنون حتى يعقل, and the insane one until they become sane. So these are examples of preventers. Like the Prophet told us, a child is not accountable. It's not like what Augustine believed. Augustine believed that if you didn't baptize the child, he goes to hell. They actually believed that for the longest of times. The Catholic Church, that was the official position. I don't know if you know this. This is not controversial. They believe that.
Don't they still believe that?
I think they still do, but a previous pope tried to change the game, in one of his. But in the religion of Islam, we don't believe a child can be accountable. الصبي حتى يحلم. He's not accountable. Okay. But likewise, an insane person is not accountable. And so that's why someone who has not heard the message of Islam is not accountable. وَمَا كُنَّا مُعَذِّبِينَ حَتَّى نَبْعَثَ رَسُولًا. We were not going to punish them until we have sent the messenger. And so on. So a jahil or jahl or ignorance is a what? Preventer. It's a preventer. And it's very interesting because someone who does ta'wil, a big scholar, and they get it wrong, they're falling into a kind of jahl, which is jahl murakkab. They're ignorant, but it's compounded ignorance because they think they're right. I met somebody who's a person of knowledge recently, and we were talking about an issue which I disagree with him on. And he was like, I have yaqeen on this mas'ala. I said, that's it, then you're ma'dhur. I said, therefore, you're excused. He said, no, I have yaqeen, and what he was saying was aberrational from the standpoint of Islamic jurisprudence. And these other brothers wanted to make tabdee of him. Wallahi, uqsam, this is a true story. I said, look, brothers, he's saying he has yaqeen, which means he's jahil murakkab. What? If he's wrong, he's jahil murakkab. It's so interesting and so amazing how the highest echelons of people, scholars, can say the most ridiculous things, but they use the most intellectual approach to come to the most silly conclusion. That's so ajib how Allah He humbles us with ignorance like that. So the most intelligent of us, and you can see this with almost all of the abaqirah of humankind, the genii of human civilization. Like honestly, go back to Aristotle. We can pick up what Aristotle says, some of the things he said. He's a genius, one of the biggest genius. The women have less teeth than men, or some silly thing he says, he's a huge genius, and he says foolish things like that. Every scholar has made huge mistakes and blunders, and they don't even realize it. And this is a kind of ta'wil that they're making, and it's actually a kind of jahl, actually. Jahl murakkab. But they're the highest of scholars and big people. Anybody in Islamic history, Ibn Taymiyyah, Al-Ghazali, Al-Juwayni, Mohammed Hijab. I'm only kidding. But
Sorry, Mohammed.
Yeah.
When in a situation where you got some backwards, poor countries,
Yeah.
and you have really simple people been following these bid'ahs
Yeah.
for generations,
Yeah.
because that's the way they've been taught, and they don't have the ability to, would they be excused?
Well, Ibn
doing that?
Taymiyyah would say so. If you know that it's a bid'ah, you don't follow it. But if you don't know and you're following an authority, Allah is not this a view of Allah as some kind of dictator, astaghfirullah yani. This is like a dictatorial understanding of God. He's a totalitarian dictator. You done this, you don't know. The people don't know these things. Allah, He does udhr, He does pardoning, and we have an optimistic understanding of the mercy of Allah. That's what it boils down to, really. We have to have an optimistic understanding that Allah is not going to punish people for no reason. We don't believe that. We believe Allah punishes those who have been exposed to the message, who have been given the truth, who have been given the evidences, who know now the truth. قد تبين الرشد من الغي فمن يكفر بالطاغوت ويؤمن بالله فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى. It's been clear, the truth has been made clear from falsehood. Now punishments and all these rewards become applicable to you now. But so we have shurut, and we have mawana, we have conditions, we have preventers. You come into Islam, these are the conditions. Leave Islam, preventers. Takfir, you need preventers to be left. Now bid'ah, same thing. Same thing exactly. Same thing. There's conditions to be a mubtada'. Some things have to be met. And there are mawana', there are preventers that stop someone from being a mubtada'. He might be in a culture where his understanding of Islam is, okay, this sheikh, that one here. Obviously within reason. However, Allah, He is merciful, and according to the scholars of Islam, this person is pardoned. That's why, and in many ways actually, bid'ah is more difficult to ascertain than kufr. It's more elusive. We talked about two understandings of bid'ah, the broader view and the stricter view. We don't really have this with kufr like that. Kufr is clear. Someone who goes against the Quran in one of the clear verses, muhkamat. Most people would, when kufr is done, you'll find that most people in the Muslim community from all the sects agree that kufr has been done. You'll find that this is the case. But with bid'ah, it's much more elusive, it's much more technical, it's much more complicated. So in many ways, the shurut and the mawana' become more complicated, and you require more of a specialist to unpack it. And now say if a sheikh comes and he says this is bid'ah and this is not bid'ah, or this person is a mubtada', do we have to follow the sheikh? Even if he brings what he thinks is the evidence. There's no requirement for us to follow that sheikh. That's his opinion. He is not a god. He is not he's not a pope. We don't believe in a pope figure in Islam. There's no one person that can speak on behalf of Islam, except for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. كل إنسان يؤخذ منه ويرد عليه إلا صاحب هذا القبر, as the Imam Malik said about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his grave. He said that everybody, كلكم راد ومردود عليه. You take from them and you reject part of what they believe, and you respond to them, except for Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because we believe he's infallible when it comes to these things. So we don't believe in a pope figure when it comes to Islam, and there is not one person that can bully us into, this has to be that person and that person, because this is what's happening today. Whether it's Rabi' al-Madkhali or this person, or he made the tabdee of that person, and all these kind of things happening, we don't need to be dragged into that. And it's not just, by the way, the Salafis. Ash'aris have the same problem. Ash'ar Maturidis have the same issue. This person's a mubtada'. Sufis have the same issue. Shias have the same issue. Every group has this issue. Okay, and obviously some of those groups we would say they have no right to talk about anything. We will talk about whether you're Muslim or not. That's the question.
Going back to culture, yeah.
Huh?
Going back to culture, like you said. So if you live in a culture where this bid'ah been done, we are influenced by that. That's something that we're not punished by that. Is that what you said?
I said that there could be a very valid excuse which Ibn Taymiyyah accepted, as is a pardon, yes.
So wouldn't we say that, okay, God also gave us conscience or brain or to think and to reason? And
Yeah, but this goes back to Qudra. Does that a person have the ability to go through the hadith and go through these technical things? Most people you'll find don't have the privilege of doing what we're doing today.
so
Yeah.
imagine these countries celebrate Mawlad, yeah?
Hmm?
Mawlad or
Yeah,
or-
yeah.
So like Pakistan, or, so you find a lot of people that don't have, they're not knowledgeable at all, and everything they learn is from
Yeah, exactly. There you have it. So
So-
Ibn Taymiyyah, what do you think he would say to something like that? Or do you think these people are mubtada'a, we're going to see them, we're going to not say salam to them and do hajr of them, which
Yeah.
means to boycott them and bully them, cancel them? That's not the tolerant attitude.
But like, so countries like I mentioned, Pakistan, yeah, or
Yeah.
I don't know, this underdeveloped countries, I would say is what we have to do is try to invest more in education, so that the people can have that.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. But let's conclude this session today, because what we've discussed is, we've discussed number one, bid'ah, what it is, the views in Islam, scholarly views. We've discussed number two, tabdee', which is the pronouncing bid'ah on somebody, that you need to have shurut and mawani', which are preventers and conditions. That those conditions include, but are not limited to, jahl, which is ignorance, which is a huge bab in of itself, insanity, lack of information, and that goes back to jahl in a sense. Ta'wil, we said, which is if a scholar makes an ijtihad of some sorts. And we talked to you also about taqleed, if someone's following someone and they don't realize any better, and that goes back to jahl. In a sense, it goes back to jahl. And karaha, if someone's being forced to do something, that's something else. These things are always there. So we need to be humble with the believers, and we need to be tolerant with the believers, because pronouncing someone as a mubtada' really is taking away from their rights. It's seriously taking away from their rights, because these mubtada', you're effectively calling them fusaq, which means that they're evildoers, which has such far-reaching consequences. They can be boycotted, they can be bullied in society, their marriages can end, their houses can be destroyed. This is cancel culture, really, but within the Islamic world, and this is something we must, in a sense, we must fight this. And this is not to say there's no such thing as tabdee', or there's not a place for tabdee' and takfir. Of course there's a place for it. But we're saying that the bullying that is going on in the name of labeling and stigmatizing Muslim people with these labels is something which people have used for monetary gain and continue using for cult appropriation. And if you find somebody calling you to their way and to their scholars and in opposition to other people, this is usually the first critical sign of something going wrong. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ فَرَّقُوا دِينَهُمْ وَكَانُوا شِيَعًا لَسْتَ مِنْهُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ. That the ones who have divided their religion and become Shia, have become different sects, then you have nothing to do with them. O Muhammad. This is in the Quran. and the Shia called himself Shia, actually funny, which is ajib, really. But this is something that is very clear. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when he was giving advice to Hudhayfa, and Hudhayfa said, what happens when we don't have a leader, we don't have an imam? Who should we follow? He says, فَاعْتَزِلَ الْفِرَقَ كُلَّهَا. Leave all the groups. Leave all the groups. When we call ourselves Sunnis, all we're saying is that we follow the way of the Prophet. أهل السنة والجماعة, meaning أهل سنة النبي وجماعة الصحابة, meaning the way of the Prophet and the Sahaba, the companions who Allah already, as we're going to come talk about next session with the Shia discussion, He praised them in the Quran, and the gold stamp of approval is there. That's what we mean by it. We don't mean we have to go under these people here or these mashayikh here, and if we don't follow this sheikh, then you're a mubtada'. This is serious, dangerous talk, wallah. And if this was acceptable with anybody, it would have been acceptable with some of the scholars of the Salaf, some of which had made tabdee' of Abu Hanifa himself. I'm not sure if you guys know this, but Abu Hanifa had made tabdee' of some of the Hanbalis, made tabdee', clear-cut tabdee' of Abu Hanifa. He called them murji'at al-fuqaha, and called him this and called him that, and some of them even make tabdee' of Bukhari. I said, he believes in khalq of Quran and this and that. If we have to follow all these labels, our great men would be cancelled. There's not a man in history that has not been cancelled by somebody. Ibn Taymiyyah being cancelled by some of the Ash'ari, the Ash'ari has been cancelled by Ibn Taymiyyah, and the Maturidis is being cancelled by this. There's too much cancelling going on. How about this? How about we calm down and we find out on the Day of Judgment. Jazakumullah khair wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.